Professor Mem here. Today I am continuing my Battlefield 1 weapons tier list series with the next class in line, Medic. As per usual, I will be rating these weapons by multiple factors, including gameplay, looks and animations, and my playstyle biases, basically boiling down to how much I personally like them. Now, despite Medic only having 12 distinct primaries, and even that's generous because it depends on whether you'd split one specific variant off as a different weapon, almost the whole arsenal of Medic primaries has felt so samey to me. Almost all of them have a 3-shot to kill max damage, while falling in a range of 225 to 360 rounds per minute, with almost all of those guns being a perfect split between killing in 3 shots across the board or having a 4-shot to kill minimum damage. I'll be favoring guns that actually wake me up by not conforming to this standard. Okay, time to start alienating the medic mains in my audience. Cei-Rigotti. The Cei-Rigotti, though it looks like a diminutive carbine when compared to the large and long rifles that make up most of the rest of this list, has a formidably ranged damage model, and establishes the power that can be expected out of the weapons of the self-loading rifle class. It kills in 3 shots out to 54 meters, and then only 4 after that. It's just the right amount of externally mechanical to be interesting, steampunk, but not a hideous kludge like the Howell. Kookily enough, this gun is select fire. This is basically the main point of interest of the gun. It was a very early gas-operated infantry rifle, and capable of fully automatic fire to boot. However, this isn't represented in an interesting way in-game at all. Instead of a realistically full-speed automatic fire, we basically get the semi-automatic fire rate cap decided for this gun, which happens to be 300 RPM, and full auto just lets us fire that fast without spamming the trigger. It's not full auto as much as it's just a shortcut to a reasonable semi-auto fire rate. Well, you might say. At least it's technically a bonus. But I'd have to disagree with you. Maybe I'm just bad, which I am, but with a fire rate this low, holding the trigger just screws me up. Since I'm operating it like a fully automatic, when I hold down the mouse and my shots aren't already hitting, I sweep the target, which would be reasonable to do with any machine gun or SMG, but in this case it just causes me to miss. There simply isn't enough volume of fire for a sweep to catch somebody, which is why semi-auto is actually better. When I have to click for each shot, my hand actually makes a more concentrated effort to micro-correct my aim with each click. Now, these corrections aren't always precise, but it seems to work a lot better in both aimed fire and hip fire when each shot is a dedicated action, not just part of a burst. And with high recoil as is present on these rifles, sometimes you need more than 0.2 of a second to recalibrate. So all that was just a long aside to say that I personally don't get any benefit out of full auto fire, but the gun still needs to be judged on its own merits. Of course, the Cei-Rigotti is clip loading with a 10-round magazine, and that would seem to be its chief downside. However, in this class one must get used to clip loaders. 10 rounds is the fair minimum for most momentary engagements. The sights are pretty good, and yeah, I'm gonna be talking about sights because I have major issues being accurate with this game's semi-auto rifles, and any help I can get is appreciated. They're tall and give a fair view of the target and what's around it. The Cei-Rigotti has the best base vertical recoil for guns with its damage model, but because some other primaries have the recoil reducing storm variant and this one does not, even some guns more powerful have less recoil. It also has higher than average horizontal recoil. Of the variants that this gun does have, I prefer Trench, as it works in tandem with its moderate recoil, damage, and fire rate to make the Cei-Rigotti surprisingly competent at close range and as competent as it should be at medium range, as long as you're a little more careful than average with your shots. It trades a low, albeit very manageable ammo availability for a fantastically average performance. However, its practical range feels limited, making this gun feel at times like a much less fun version of Assault's RSC SMG. It's consistent at short to medium range, but by no means the best for it. C tier. Anyhow, I'm literally up in the trench, jorking my bolt. Selbstlader M1916. Stepping about as far away as SLRs get from the Cei-Rigotti, the 1916 Selbstlader is a high-capacity detachable magazine rifle that kills in 3 shots at any range. The cons are that at 225 RPM it fires the slowest of any 3-shot self-loader, and its recoil control is poor on both the vertical and horizontal planes. However, this gun automatically gets a ton of points because it has a marksman variant. For many of these guns, a scope is the only way I can actually feel like I'm not whiffing my shots. It's not just about magnification. More important than that is that the scope is the best sight picture. There's no blockages in my line of sight, the point of aim is unambiguous, and you don't have to deal with iron sights' animation of recoil that can often be a detriment on top of the recoil itself. So yeah, this is definitely made for slower handling, but you're pretty much never worried about ammo, especially with a fast for this class reload. Even with that low fire rate and the wider self-loading rifle hipfire, the high capacity and low shots to kill can be viable for very close range, what practically amounts to blind firing. As always, the hinged trigger guard acting as a magazine release is interesting, but it's not very pronounced. As far as gameplay feel, it honestly might as well be a modern DMR. Biggest downside? Long shot resets, either forced by the fire rate cap or necessary because of the recoil. B tier. M1917 SL. In one of the few breaks from the two standard damage models, as illustrated by the last two primaries, this is still one of the less extreme departures. Comparable to a more blitz-like version of the Cei-Rigotti, it shares its fire rate as well as many of its invisible stats, but has a lower muzzle velocity and drops to 4 shots to kill earlier, after 38 meters. After 54 meters, when the Rigotti falls to 4 shots, the 1907 falls to 5. But recall, I didn't really use the Cei-Rigotti that far anyway, so presumably there's some positive trade-offs for this lesser damage. Well, it's all in the magazine. 20 rounds with the fastest partial reload of the class. That's seriously it. The recoil is actually a bit worse, with the horizontal variants being worse than everything else available to this class besides its most powerful weapon. But for the range this and the likes of the Cei-Rigotti are calibrated for, the freedom of ammo seems to be a bigger buff than recoil. And I know that might sound crazy coming from me. Without the worry and consequences, you can actually spam your 300 RPM effectively, both in hipfire and with the good sights. Respectively, you have a trench variant, best for closer quarters maps, and the unique sweeper variant, best for everything else. This variant reduces recoil, but only in the vertical axis. It also allows fully automatic fire, but it's the same kind of lame half-assed full auto you see in the Cei-Rigotti. Still not worth it. Also of note, while this was probably inspired by legends of full auto versions of this real gun, just like with the Automatico of Assault, I'm here to tell you those almost certainly didn't exist. I'm not using the term legends facetiously. That accurately describes the level which reports of full auto 1907s are apocryphal. Anyhow, with nothing more than a generous increase in the bullet allowance, this weapon is more capable for its optimal range despite being saddled with drawbacks. It's not much to look at from the view model, slab-sided and smooth, but the Winchester Model 1907 always manages to become interesting again when I remember that it's basically a classic Winchester lever action but self-loading. Look. B tier. Mondragon. This is the most pure long-range DMR. It has that 3-shot to kill across the board damage model like the 1916, but has an integral 10-round magazine, fires slightly faster at 257 rounds per minute, and the only recoil difference is a little less horizontal movement per shot. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the sights on the Mondragon, but the Storm variant, in case you didn't know, one of the greatest gun variants in this game, reduces the recoil of the Mondragon to be one of the lowest of this class, let alone this damage model. That's pretty based, but to be honest, I still find a lot more luck with Old Reliable, the Sniper variant. It's just like Marksman, except it has a bipod. That can be pretty helpful sometimes, but the scope is still what makes it the best. The high ammo availability of the Selbstlader 1916 is nice, but kind of the opposite of the relationship between the Cei-Rigotti and the M1907. On the scoped and longer range focused guns, I think I prefer trading ammo for the slight recoil improvement and faster fire rate of the Mondragon. Remember, a faster fire rate isn't just good for spamming. A faster fire rate also means you will reset from recoil sooner when not firing. I don't mind losing the high capacity in exchange for more specialization into the role of long-range dominance. The Mondragon itself is a pretty unremarkable gun for looks, a mostly nondescript semi-auto rifle, but that kind of makes it smooth and contributes to the sleek DMR image. This rifle gets high marks for its sniper variant, and gets a little extra for its pretty alright storm variant. A tier. Autoloading 835. Now this feels like a very odd thing to say about a 5-shot magazine rifle, but the Auto 8 ditches the clunkiness present on almost all other guns here. The Autoloading 8 is the only medic rifle that fires at 360 RPM, which is considered high-end for this class, the next fastest being 300 RPM, and that extra bullet per second really makes a big difference. The horizontal recoil is also excellent, meaning that for the most part you're only compensating for muzzle rise. Even though this gun has minimum capacity and doesn't even have the stronger damage model, dropping to 4 shots past 70 meters, I don't fret over every shot because I simply don't miss as often. Of course, I'm mostly speaking of the Marksman variant, but this also applies to the Factory. It's an efficient weapon out to a fairly long range, pretty much fills everything in between the Sniper Mondragon and Sweeper M1907, and even encroaches on their territory a little bit. It's a bare-bones look from the same design lineage as the 12G Auto shotgun. It feels more like a sporting weapon than a weapon of war. which it is. This gun would be a dream if it had a better capacity, but as it stands, it'll have to settle for being an excellent weapon. A tier. Autoloading 825. Oh my, speak of the devil and he shall appear. This particular weapon represents a smaller caliber model of the same gun, though using an aftermarket extended detachable magazine that's actually a decade or more too early for this time period. So this presents as a package that's pretty much what it says on the tin. In many aspects the same gun, but higher ammo availability and less vertical recoil for a weaker damage model. The damage is like an additional step back from the M1917 SL, still killing in 3 shots but only out to 22 meters, then 4 out to 38 meters. With a high fire rate, soft and linear recoil, good sights, and default hipfire that's on the better half of this class's options, this gun is an amazing short ranger, but precise enough not to be limited to that role. Aside from maybe some trench variants, it's definitely the best SLR for those first 22 meters, because it'll be faster than all, more controllable than almost all, and will hold all the ammo you need. 15 rounds is more than enough in a detachable magazine, and it allows for the more haphazard firing that is conducive to this damage, and again I'm liable to do because I suck with iron sights. It displaces pretty much everything else if I'm looking for short to mid-range, including the M1907 in most cases. However, seeing as it's just this one variant and there's a later weapon that does the same range better, I'll have to leave the Auto 825 extended in A tier despite all the good things I have to say about it. Oh, and if you would prefer that I had ranked both versions of the Auto 8 together, the reason I didn't is because the game seems to treat it as a separate weapon. It has its own icon, and if you still only see it as a variant, it is perhaps the variant that makes the most changes from the base model. But, all that notwithstanding, if you had preferred I did it your way anyway, well, it's pretty easy to say that the Autoloading 8 would be an S tier. Selbstlader 1906. Now there's the Luger, there's the Big Luger, and then there's the Big Luger. With the same damage model as the Mondragon and the other Selbstlader, the 1906 is another medic DMR. It has the lowest base recoil of the weapons with this damage model. Its horizontal recoil is actually the smallest in the class period, although this model is beaten by some of the Storm variants like the Mondragon, if only in the vertical. But if you ask me, that's generally the more important one. The other thing this gun has going for it is it's the fastest firing of the DMRs we've seen so far, 300 RPM. The thing is though, this gun only has a 5-round magazine, fed by stripper clips. Huh, I didn't see that as a problem in the Auto 8, so why here? This is where I need to start tearing this weapon down. For one thing, the reload is extremely slow. That's most of the time anyway. When topping up with individual rounds, the 1906 is much slower per bullet than anything else in this class. Take a look at this comparison. All of the others are competing for fractions of seconds. They feel expedient in battle. The huge startup and ending time of the 1906 Selbstlader makes it feel so unqualified for anything closer than mid-range, and makes every shot feel dire. Only once all rounds have been spent does the 1906 kick it into gear, actually being pretty fast with the clip. It's kinda bonkers on a weapon like this and a waste of your limited ammo, but you really might be better off shooting away extra rounds that you don't use in order to get that faster reload. This is a weapon statistically calibrated for range, but your starter variant is factory, and a weak factory variant too. It doesn't even deserve the meager and underwhelming title that variant conveys, because it barely has its bonuses. No boost to recoil recovery at all, and a minimal boost to accuracy recovery. And while the high fire rate may make it seem better for close range, it almost never feels appropriate to fire that fast. For one thing, the sights are kind of busy, but more importantly, the toggle lock jumps up to flash in front of your face for every shot. I know it's realistic, but that doesn't mean it doesn't interrupt my sight picture. Sometimes I even preferred to get closer just so I could use hipfire instead of the sights. You know, the iron sights, that are meant to be most appropriate for these short ranges. There's nothing I've done in these clips that I couldn't have done better with a scoped Mondragon, and for me, this is the only variant. You know why? There is a second sniper variant, but it requires getting 300 kills with the factory variant. The sad thing is, I know a scope may solve a lot of my problems. The sniper version of the Selbstlader 1906 may very well be a weapon that I would love, but ain't nobody got time to get 300 kills with this samey, lamey, low-capacity weapon just for a video. I mean, I'd rather release this thing in a timely manner than delay it trying to rack up 3 service stars with a weapon I don't like to use in a class of weapons that I already don't see almost any variety in. I may be going a little too hard on this gun, and as always, if you like this gun and it works for your playstyle, that's valid and I'm happy for you, but this gun is definitely my least favorite in the class. Not unusable, but a low performer among many alternatives. E tier. RSC 1917. God above, finally some salvation from these 3-shot damage models. I'm sure many of you know this by now, but in case you're like me and needed someone to tell you at some point that this gun is different from the rest, the RSC has a max damage of 53. It only takes 2 shots to kill out to 70 meters. Now, I learned that a long time ago at this point, but it was still far later than I should have. I just thought it was like everything else on this list, just slow. And I can respect it because unlike some Battlefield 5 self-loaders, it doesn't 2-shot regardless of range. Now, it may not have a scope, but you still certainly feel the impact of that damage and range. The iron sights are some of the better, thank God. The capacity is low, but it's a 5+1 rounder and detachable. Not the fastest reload, but it still counts for a lot. The lowest fire rate at 180 rounds per minute is obvious, but the bigger disparity is the recoil, which is easily the harshest per shot, both vertical and horizontal. However, these small obstacles are nowhere near enough to invalidate the fresh and powerful damage model. Between the reasonability of the sights and the fact that I'm less frantic knowing that I only need to hit 2 shots, the recoil is no big consequence, as slowing down with the RSC often yields big results. I find both variants to be good, if unremarkable. Ironically, despite not having a sniper variant, this is the medic primary that most makes you play like a sniper, at least in the way that kills often go like acquire, fire, reacquire, fire, and many a time no more than that, as opposed to generally having an enemy near your sights the whole time but relying on volume of fire. I don't know what else to say other than rewording the same thing repeatedly. 2-shot good, not boring, I'm better with it. Pardon me showing favoritism for the diversity pick. It even looks and reloads quite unlike anything else from Medic. S tier. Fedorov Avtomat. Oh man. Guys, you have no idea. Okay, you may have a bit of an idea. The Fedorov Avtomat is already evidently great, as any Joe Schmo who's played the game can tell you, but somehow, when you read into the stats, it gets even better. A design a little too World War II for the World War I time period, it's a full auto. A real full auto this time. It fires at 450 rounds per minute, and was evidently built around being fully automatic, unlike the Cei-Rigotti and M1917, which feel wrong in everything from the fire rate to the sound design. This firing sound is a beautiful low-pitched chugging. Since it's an automatic more in line with a submachine gun or LMG, it accordingly has their 4-shot to kill max damage. But unlike them, which fall below that threshold at 12 meters, the Fedorov doesn't do so until after 30 meters. Then for the next 8 meters it's 5 shots, then 6 after that. This damage model is objectively better than any SMG except the RSC SMG. In fact, SMGs are a great comparison, and the Fedorov absolutely stomps most of them. The trench variant gives the gun an equal hipfire to default SMGs. Compared to the most controllable SMG, the MP18, the recoil per shot is almost no different, with a slight increase to vertical recoil and slight decrease to horizontal recoil. Unlike any other full auto, it doesn't have a first shot recoil multiplier, meaning shooting is equally smooth beginning to end. Its recoil decrease stats are higher than any other non-factory variant in this class, and it has the muzzle velocity of the M1917, low for SLRs but higher than SMGs. All of this at the cost of what? A lowish fire rate? Please, that just serves to make the recoil even easier to handle. Ammo takes no hits with the 26-round magazine. This gun is just all I've ever wanted. It's what the Ribby rolls should have been. It practically invalidates all previous mid to short range guns I've talked about here, or in the rest of the game for that matter. There's no contest, this is unironically my medic primary pick 50% of the time. I would have already loved a controllable low ROF SMG, but with all the other bonuses, not least of which being the damage, that extend this thing's range, it stands alone. I would put it in its own tier above the rest of these, but I'm really committed to this tier list template at this point, so for now it will have to settle for being S tier. Bonus mention for this gun's long-lost sibling, the Fedorov Degtyarev. Every day I ask why God keeps my dreams just out of reach. The Degtyarev was a bonus for pre-ordering Battlefield 5, now unobtainable, it's pretty much a variant of the Avtomat. It has a substantial water jacket and a bipod for stabilization. That's already nice, but get this, it also gets the same recoil reduction as a Storm variant, so basically some of the lowest recoil in the game, on par with the most stable big MGs, and the only real cost is that it has the normal hipfire spread, still narrower than any default support MG. I might not leave the house if I actually had this gun, but no chance sadly. General Liu Rifle. Man, this section of the roster just does not stop coming with the bangers. For the third time in a row, we have a primary with a significant feature. While initially just another DMR along the same lines as the 1906 Selbstlader, both in gameplay and unremarkable appearance, if you press your switch fire mode button, you disconnect the gas port to make the gun manually operated. Now, logic should tell you this shouldn't change the damage of the weapon at all, and so in the test environment that's how it was, just the same thing but slower. But logic should also tell you that's incredibly stupid and sucks from a gameplay standpoint. So when the feature was implemented in the full release, the devs chose gameplay over consistency, and boy am I glad they did. With some vague groping on the end of your gun, you can switch this thing from just another Medic 3 shot to a bona fide bolt action. At 6 rounds, the magazine is unremarkable for Medic, but higher than the average Scout primary. The clip used is a 6-rounder, rather than using a 5er and a Lucy, and reloading with 1 round remaining ejects for a faster clip load. However, the reserve ammunition is much higher than any equivalent Scout rifle, which could be a big advantage if you use it in this mode. The projectile used in the bolt-action fire mode is apparently taken from the Gewehr 98, meaning it has the same velocity, damage, and sweet spot, so let's use the G98 for a more direct comparison. This gun fires significantly faster, being able to fire off its 6 shots in just about the same time it takes the Gewehr 98 to fire its 5. Additionally, since this is functionally a straight-pull bolt-action rifle, sights are moved very little in aimed fire, taking out a lot of the guesswork and readjusting involved in most bolt-action sights that usually slow you down, what with them jostling around so much. The clip reload is a little longer, but it does get that extra round, so it's pretty much equal for ammo availability. So just this one mode in and of itself is a pretty dang good bolt-action rifle, with the only downside being that there are no scoped variants. But of course this weapon also comes with a fully functioning SLR as a small bonus. It shares a lot of stats with the Selbstlader 1916, including damage and fire rate, and of course it has a similar magazine. And while its factory variant actually has the appropriate bonuses, the General Liu has more recoil, especially in the horizontal. The other variant, Storm, does definitely remediate this, basically making the recoil model a slightly better version of the Cei-Rigotti, but to be honest, both versions are better firing in my opinion, since the sights and firing animations are much better. I can actually benefit from the fire rate being as high as 300 RPM. Individually, both modes are very respectable, but it's the ability to switch at will with such rapidity that can be a huge help. While many times I just switch to bolt action by default since I often pick the General Liu specifically to use it and it's more efficient on ammo, I've certainly noticed that the moments when I hot swap according to the situation are both satisfying and demonstrate the effectiveness of this feature. S tier. Farquhar-Hill. With a damage model basically the same as the Cei-Rigotti, killing in 3 shots out to 54 meters, this gun fires at a slower 257 RPM like the higher damage Mondragon and Selbstlader 1916. What it gets in exchange for being on the lower side of power and speed is its 20-round detachable magazine and its great recoil. The Storm variant is pretty ridiculous, the best per-shot recoil of any medic gun besides the Avtomat. Now that sounds like it might be up my alley, huh? Slow and very steady with a lot of spare shots, kind of like the M1917 carbine. Well, there comes a point when a gun is just too slow for this kind of playstyle. For me at least, 257 RPM seems to be below the cutoff point for an aggressive low recoiling iron sights gun, or else I would have liked the Mondragon Storm more. Also, it's possible that I just suck with them for whatever reason, but I think the sights on the Farquhar-Hill are a prime example of terrible iron sights. They're extremely claustrophobic. The front sight feels too close to the eye. It is tall and blunt, with this wide block underneath. The sight protector wings are large and distracting, and the whole thing is encircled by a poorly placed rear sight ring that shifts all around when you're moving. Which, I know this isn't the case since it's a video game and the point of aim is still probably here, but my brain still interprets it as changing the point of aim like it would through a real gun's sights. In my opinion, the secret to good FPS iron sights, which is especially important if you're going to be using them for consecutive semi-auto shots, are that the sights either need to be short, leaving very little visible below the point of aim to make that point of aim unambiguous, or they need to be very open or minimalist if they're tall, leaving your sight picture unambiguous. Again, all of this might just be a very big skill issue, but if I'm judging these guns from my perspective, which I am, the Farquhar-Hill ranks very low because it's difficult to use well. Between the fire speed and visibility, the sights only seem to work consistently on still or slow targets. What I end up doing most of the time is just taking advantage of the high capacity to get close and hit fire spam despite the wider spread, just to get some usage out of this gun. It is certainly the most notable design of this class besides maybe the Fedorov Degtyarev, and the empty reload is fast thanks to this neat feature. I mean, even the magazine itself is neat, being a drum for a rifle, and the proper animation of engaging the cartridge cutoff switch so you don't do one of these. It's a real shame that I have so little incentive to use it. D tier. Howell Automatic. I know at the start of this video I said that the Howell is a hideous kludge, but that doesn't mean it's not still cool. This is not the last bolt-action to self-loading conversion we'll see in this series, but this one really just lays it all out to be seen. The clear magazine Lee basis has pretty much the minimum add-ons. A gas piston that acts directly on the bolt handle, a 20-round trench magazine, offset sights, and pretty much everything else is for safety or ergonomics. Everything from the awkward bolt pull to the ring trigger has something of interest visually. As for stats, it shares a lot in common with the Farquhar-Hill, with the same projectile and fire rate, and pretty similar ammo availability, although it's one more round and a slightly faster partial reload, so yeah. While its recoil is barely different from the base version of the Farquhar-Hill, it obviously can't compete with the Storm variant. However, the Howell has a sniper variant, which is why I choose to look at it from a different angle, especially because the sights alone make comparing these two like apples and oranges. To me, the Howell is like the better handling but weaker version of the Mondragon. It has recoil that's slightly lower on the vertical and much lower on the horizontal plane, as well as the detachable high-capacity mag, in exchange for falling below the 3-hit threshold at 55 meters and having a slightly slower projectile. This makes it pretty great if you ask me, especially on maps that aren't that big. Its greater ammo availability also means that it's easier to take a position with a bipod for a suppressing fire roll, where the recoil becomes very stable and you don't have to worry about sacrificing a power position because you don't have enough readily available shots to hold it. I really do love the scope so much, especially at lower magnifications. It works as an extremely clear alternative to iron sights. Definitely my favorite detachable mag rifle below 360 RPM. A tier. Well, I hope I didn't say anything too out of sorts. As always, this tier list is very opinion-based and shouldn't serve to invalidate how anyone else feels about these guns. As promised, I showed favoritism toward the guns that have significant differences from the rest. Not only am I pleased with them not having the same damage models, but I also really like their playstyles as well. The RSC's got the most power for being slow and steady. The Fedorov Trench, despite being an SLR, is still the best submachine gun in the game, and the General Liu Storm is both a fast and high-damaging self-loader with low recoil, and a very admirable iron sight scout rifle. In A tier you have more of the broad strokes good rifles, with the Mondragon Sniper being the long ranger, the Auto 835 being a very efficient killer in exchange for ammo, the Auto 825 is the short to mid-range controllable semi-auto, and the Howell Sniper is an all-rounder with a great mag. In B tier, the 1916 Selbstlader has its better magazine, but ultimately doesn't supplant the Mondragon because of its worse fire rate and recoil. The M1917 is somewhat versatile, though calibrated around close range, but I still prefer the rapidity and recoil control of the Auto 825. C tier's Cei-Rigotti is trying to be an all-rounder, but doesn't pull this off as well as the Howell or even the M1907. The Farquhar-Hill is in D tier for its really bad sights and not having the fire rate to compensate. I know there's an optical version, but it gets rid of the Storm variant's recoil control, which was the only gameplay feature that made this gun interesting in the first place. Plus, I generally don't like the optical sights. And down in E tier is the 1906 Selbstlader. Between its debilitating sights, low capacity, and slow reload, the Selbstlader does not get to take any advantage of its chief benefits, the fire rate and recoil model. I seriously wouldn't want to grind the 300 kills it takes to get the sniper variant, even though it may be much better. The Mondragon would still probably come out on top for me. I hope you guys have enjoyed the video, and in case I haven't said it lately, I'm extremely grateful for all of my subscribers and the people who leave nice comments on my videos. 10,000 subs looks like it's a milestone that might be within reach if my channel stays on the trajectory it's on. I have all of you to thank for that, especially if you're watching to the end of the video and interacting. It's your continued support that has helped me get this far, and I won't forget that. Alright, I've been Professor Mem. I'll see you next time on this series when I tackle the guns of support.